house of Leonato, governor of Messina, all was fuss and flutter. The governor's old friend, Don Pedro, the Prince of Aragon, and several of his captains had visited the house on their way to war. With the war safely ended, the prince and his friends were now coming to visit again. Shortly before Don Pedro's arrival, two lovely young women dashed down the staircase in front of the governor's house. One of them was Leonato's daughter Hero, and the other was her cousin, Beatrice. And although the two were as close as sisters, they could not be more different. Dark-haired Hero's innocent blue eyes matched her mild-mannered sweetness. Beatrice, though, had fair hair, a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. "You fought well," said Beatrice to her cousin as they descended the staircase. "You took quite a fancy to him last time he was here, didn't you?" "Just as you did to Lord Benedict," Hero blushed. "Benedict!" Beatrice rolled her eyes. "He is the most irritating man I have ever met." "Why? Because he's as witty as you?" asked Hero. "Witty?" Beatrice growled. "If he had to live off his wit, he'd soon starve." Hero and Beatrice reached the courtyard and stood beside Leonato just as the prince's party rode through the gates and dismounted. Don Pedro was flanked by Claudio, whose dark brown curls glowed in the sunlight, and Benedict, whose mouth wore his customary cynical smile. Behind them was Don John, the prince's half-brother, and his servant Baraccio. After embracing Leonato, Don Pedro stared in amazement at Hero. "You've grown so tall while I've been away," he exclaimed. Hero, who was gazing at Claudio, who was gazing back at Hero, made no reply. "Or have we grown shorter, my lord?" quipped Benedict. "Perhaps the heavy armour we've been wearing has squashed us." "Why are you prattling on?" said Beatrice sharply. "No one is listening." Benedict mocked her with a bow. "Ah, Lady Beatrice, as scornful as ever." "Hardly surprising," said Beatrice, "when there's so much to be scornful of." And with that, she followed Don Pedro and her uncle into the house. Benedict nudged Claudio in the ribs. "Pity the man who marries her, eh, Claudio?" he chuckled. "Claudio?" Claudio was glassy-eyed. "Did you see Hero?" he murmured. "Yes, pretty girl. Not as pretty as her cousin, like." "Oh, she's the most wonderful person in the world," sighed Claudio. "You haven't fallen in love, have you?" "Head over heels," said Claudio. "Next you'll be telling me you're going to marry her." "If I don't marry her, I don't know what I'll do," sighed Claudio gloomily. And with that, Don Pedro appeared at the doorway. "What's keeping you both?" he inquired. "Claudio is in love with Hero and wants to marry her," declared Benedict. "My lord, the day you're here I wish to marry. Set me up as a target and shoot at me with arrows." "Is this true, Claudio?" the prince said. "Yes," said Claudio. "I didn't notice Hero before because I could only think of the war, but now I've seen her beauty, I just can't live without her. What shall I do, my lord?" Don Pedro placed a hand on Claudio's shoulder. "Leave this to me," he said. "Leonato is holding a masked ball tonight. I shall dance with Hero, explain your feelings for her. If she feels the same, I'll ask Leonato for a hand on your behalf." Claudio beamed. Benedict muttered under his breath. That night, The ballroom at the governor's house swelled with music and dancers. Claudio stood on tiptoe and peered anxiously as Don Pedro and Hero swept across the dance floor. On the opposite side of the room, Benedict, who wore a mask like a hare, was in conversation with Beatrice, whose mask resembled an owl's face. Benedict had adopted a very strange accent to try and conceal his identity. Beatrice knew full well who he was, but she pretended that she didn't. "Would you tell me your name, stranger?" she pleaded. "Pardon me, but no," said Benedict. "You're as provoking as Lord Benedict," grumbled Beatrice. "Lord Benedict?" Benedict said. "Who is he?" "He's the prince's jester and the dullest of fools," said Beatrice. "People laugh more behind his back than they do at his jokes." "If I meet him, I'll tell him you said so," Benedict said. "Oh, please do," said Beatrice, slipping away between the dancing couples. Benedict was stung. "So that's her opinion of me," he thought. "A jester and a dull fool." He frowned, puzzled. "I don't know why I should care what she thinks about me. We can't stand each other, can we?" Meanwhile, Don Pedro presented Hero to Claudio, while Leonardo looked on in smiling approval. "The lady is rude and wan," said the prince. "You'll be married in the family chapel the day after tomorrow," Leonardo declared. These words were caught by a man wearing a fox's head mask. "My master ought to know about this," thought the man, threading through the throng. He was Don John's servant, Borachio. As Don Pedro raised a goblet of wine to celebrate Claudio and Hero's engagement, Benedict chanced by, looking very glum indeed. "Celebrate with us, Benedict," Don Pedro urged. "Forgive me, my lord, but I'm not in the mood," said Benedict. "I'm escaping from Lady Beatrice. I've had enough of her for one night." Don Pedro smiled at Benedict's receding back. "What a couple Benedict and Beatrice would make," he said. Leonardo just laughed out loud. "They would talk themselves mad inside a week." "I suspect that they're fonder of each other than they realise," said Don Pedro. "If we convinced Benedict that Beatrice was in love with him, and Beatrice that Benedict loved her, nature would do the rest." "But how can we convince them, my lord?" Claudio said. Don Pedro lowered his voice, and the others huddled round like conspirators. Borachio discovered Don John skulking in his room. "You should have come to the ball, my lord," Borachio said. Don John scowled. "Watching the prince being flattered would have sickened me, because our father married his mother and not mine. He rules while I serve. I daren't challenge him, but if I could find a way to hurt him and his fawning friends, I may know a way, my lord," Borachio smirked. "I've learned that Lady Hero is to marry Lord Claudio. I've also learned that Lady Hero's chambermaid Margaret is sweet on me, and that's given me an idea." "What idea?" asked Don John. Borachio answered at length, and what he said brought a cruel smile to his master's lips. The next morning, Benedict was strolling through the governor's gardens, deep in thought. "Why does love turn people into fools?" he mused. Short while back, Claudio was a courageous soldier. Now he's a drooling lapdog. It'll take some special sort of woman to win my love. Beautiful, wise, witty, well-to-do, where am I going to find someone like that? Benedict followed a path between two hedges, and from the opposite side of the hedge to his left, he heard Don Pedro chatting with Leonato. The subject of their conversation made him stop in his tracks, but the hedge prevented him from seeing the twinkle in the men's eyes as they spoke. "So your niece Beatrice loves Benedict," said Don Pedro. "To distraction," replied Leonato. "It's pitiful to hear her at night whispering his name and weeping." "But she behaved as if she detests Benedict," said Claudio. "Pretense," Leonato assured him. "She knows that if Benedict finds out she loves him, he'll humiliate her. And to spare herself, she keeps her breaking heart hidden." "Should I talk to Benedict and tell him to be gentle with her?" inquired Don Pedro. "I don't know what to do for the best, my lord," Leonato confided. "I'm afraid that Beatrice's passion for Benedict will drive her out of her wits." The three men sighed heavily. "Let's go inside," said Don Pedro. "A good idea might come to us over dinner." For several minutes, Benedict paced up and down, chin in his hand, while his mind churned. "Beatrice loves me," he thought. "Poor girl, I can't stand by and watch her suffer. She must be rescued, and the only rescue is for me to woo her." "Benedict," said a voice. Benedict looked round, and Beatrice was behind him. He searched her face for signs of secret love. "The prince sent me to ask you into dinner," she said. "It wasn't my idea. I don't care if you have dinner or you go without." "Thank you for taking the trouble to come and find me," said Benedict. "If it'd been any trouble, I wouldn't have bothered," Beatrice snapped, turned on her heel and flounced indoors. "If it'd been any trouble, I wouldn't have bothered," Benedict repeated softly. There's a hidden meaning in those words, somewhere. She loves me, no doubt about it. And he couldn't explain why he felt so delighted at that thought. Beatrice was on her way back to the house when she noticed her maid, Ursula, and her cousin Hero seated beside a fountain which had lots of statues on pedestals all the way around. She was going to join them, but ducked down beside the nearest statue when her maid shrieked, "Lord Benedict! In love with Lady Beatrice!" "Don Pedro told me so," said Hero. "He asked me to mention it to Beatrice, but I refused. She'll never return Benedict's love." "Why ever not?" Ursula exclaimed. "He's a handsome enough fellow." "Beatrice is too cold and proud to surrender herself to any man," said Hero. "If she knew about Benedict, she'd make a laughingstock of him, no matter how sick with love he is." "True," Ursula agreed. "Better for the poor man to die from love than from the lashing of Lady Beatrice's tongue." Cold? Proud? Me? I'll save Benedict's life. I'll save his life by loving him. Don't die yet, dearest Benedict. She'd never thought of him as dearest before.
Late that night, Don Pedro answered a knock on his door and found himself facing his half-brother. "What is it?" asked Don Pedro. "Wake your friend, Claudio," Don John said. "I have something to show him." "At this hour?" Don John nodded. "If I told him, he wouldn't believe me, and nor would you," he said grimly. "You have to see this for yourselves."
On the morning of the wedding, everyone gathered at Leonato's family chapel. Hero looked radiant in her wedding gown. Don Pedro and Claudio looked uneasy in their smart uniforms. Beatrice and Benedict were exchanging glances with each other and smiling. Friar Francis, the family priest, stood up and raised his arms. "Friends," he said, "if anyone knows of any reason why this man and this woman should not be joined in holy matrimony, then—" Claudio interrupted. "I know reason. She," he pointed at Hero, "is dishonourable. I saw her last night embracing another man." "You are mistaken," shouted Leonato. "No mistake, old friend," said Don Pedro. "I saw her too. I saw her kissing Braccio, Don John's servant. We can no longer stay in this house." Without a sound, Hero fainted and collapsed into her father's arms. Benedict and Beatrice hastened to help. An uproar broke out amongst the servants. Don Pedro and Claudio just marched straight through the clamour. Leonato's eyes were dazed. "Can this be true?" he muttered. "No!" cried Beatrice. "Hero is innocent." "Of course she is," said Benedict. "This is some trick of Don John's to spite the prince's friend." Father Francis crouched down beside Leonato. "Sir, let me advise you. Have Hero taken to her room. Tell Claudio that she has died, and Claudio will pity her. Pity will rouse loving memories in him, and in a few weeks she will be restored." "No," said Beatrice sharply. "Claudio will be punished." Overcome with emotion, Beatrice dashed into the chapel with Benedict following close behind. Beatrice stood at the altar, tears coursing down her face. "If I were a man, I'd make Claudio suffer for what he's done," she declared. "Beatrice, I love you more than all the world. Tell me what I can do to comfort you," asked Benedict. Beatrice glared at him through the tears. "Then go to Claudio. Tell him Hero is dead. And challenge him to a duel," Beatrice said fiercely. Don Pedro and Claudio were collecting their horses from the stables when Benedict found them. He ignored their greetings and he seized Claudio by the throat and slammed him against the stable door. "Hero is dead," he hissed. "Your accusations have cost an innocent lady her life. Name a time and a place and I'll fight you with whatever weapons you choose." He released Claudio, who stared at bewilderment at Don Pedro. "Hero? Dead?" he whispered. Cursing voices made the three men turn their heads. Braccio, with his hands tied behind his back, was being led up to the governor's house by a local constable. "What's this, constable?" asked Don Pedro. "I arrested this villain at an inn, my lord," the constable answered. "He was drunk and bragging about deceiving you and Lord Claudio." Braccio hung his head. "Woman you saw me with last night was Margaret, Lady Hero's chambermaid. She was dressed up in some of her mistress's old clothes," he admitted. "Don John paid me to do it." "Where is Don John?" demanded Don Pedro. "He left before daylight, my lord. I don't know where he was bound," answered Braccio. "Then I will have him hunted down," vowed Don Pedro. Claudio sank to his knees and sobbed. "Hero was innocent and I killed her.
That night, a funeral service was held for Hero. Afterwards, Claudio and Leonato spoke with each other. "Is there anything I can do to gain your forgiveness?" asked Claudio. "Nothing will bring Hero back, but there's something you can do," Leonato said. "A poor relation of mine is anxious for his daughter to marry a nobleman. She's a lovely girl, very much like my dear dead daughter. Will you take her as your wife?" Claudio, too close to tears to speak, simply nodded. And so it was the very next morning, Claudio went once more to the family chapel to be married. Waiting for him was Leonato, Don Pedro, Friar Francis, and Beatrice and Benedict, who were arm in arm with each other. "Where's my bride?" asked Claudio. "Here," said Hero, emerging from the chapel. Don Pedro stared in amazement. "Can this be the same Hero who was dead?" he asked. "She was only dead for as long as her innocence was in doubt, my lord," said Leonato. Claudio's eyes gazed in love and wonder. "Hero," he gasped. "You better take better care of her this time, Claudio," warned Benedict, "or I'll have to challenge it again." He turned to the friar. "Is there room for another couple in your chapel? Only I asked Beatrice to marry me last night and she said yes." Don Pedro laughed. "Shall I set you up as that archery target now?" Benedict grinned broadly. "No, I'm already a target, except all the arrows have been fired by Cupid."